I have the hardest time coming up with titles for my pages. I want something catchy and interesting, but nothing too cutesy or mushy. The placement of the title doesn't give me trouble, but getting the right words for the title itself is a struggle. Glitter Girl, can you help?
Of course I can. This is actually a lesson that's a little bit difficult to talk about because there are so many different ways that we can look at titles as we tell our story. And I could just go through tons and tons of different pages and point them out of how I came up with the title, but I don't think that that's going to be very riveting viewing. So instead I'm going to keep with this idea that we're going to work through one page from start to finish, and I'm going to consider a few different titles along the way, and I haven't decided right this second which one I'm going to use, and we'll see which one naturally comes out in the wash toward the end. But then I'm also going to keep this question in mind for the next few adventures and make a point of telling you a little bit about why or how I'm choosing the title on each layout. Okay, so today I'm scrapbooking these 2 4x6 photos from a children's museum, and this exhibit was entirely based on the work of Oliver Jeffords. So in case you're not familiar with his work, I just thought I would bring one of his books into the frame here so that you can get a quick idea of the style. You might think that straight away this is the sort of book that I would definitely have in my house. There's lots of beautiful blue skies, a lot of thinking about stars and the sky above, and it definitely is something that grabs my attention. But he also writes about the seaside a lot, and so part of the exhibit was based on the seaside, and some specific scenes like this pier were developed in the museum full size so that the children could walk up and down them. And you can see from his art, he does all of the story and the illustration, and the lettering is all one person. And he uses a range of different types of media to create his page, and each page in the book, but there's a lot of watercolor influence, okay? So what I wanted to do was to work with these blues and see if I could bring out that watercolor idea without being someone who could sit down and do this picture in watercolor. That is completely beyond my skill set and something that I've never tried or learned how to do at all. So I wanted to take it in a direction that would work for what I do know how to do. And that is that I can look at products that are made with watercolor, and that's somewhere I can start. So actually, there are plenty of watercolored patterns right now. It's a very popular look in collections. So I've pulled out 4 different watercolored pattern papers, 2 in shades of blue. So this one, where you can still see a little bit of the texture of the watercolor paper, that's a light blue. This is the Yin and Yang B-side from Amy Tangerine, Better Together. And then this darker one where you can't see the texture so much, but up close you can tell that it's watercolor. It's not just a flat blue. And that's also from Better Together, but that's the Sweet and Sour B-side. Okay, so that gives me the 2 blues to play with, but I wanted to bring in some other color as well. I thought yellow was a nice mix, and then happened when I was looking for these 2, found this print. Now this is from a different Amy Tangerine collection. This is Finders Keepers, and it has a similar look. The watercolor is not quite so obvious. This could be something that was done more in acrylics or other kinds of color, but it still looks hand-painted. So I'm going to go with that, and that brings in a nice gray neutral as well as the white, and gives me this shot of yellow in addition to my 2 blues. This one's going a little bit more green here, so this is more an aqua than that's a light blue, but I think when I put them all together that they work quite well. Then something else with the yellow. This is a watercolor B-side from Dear Lizzie documentary, and I thought that just a little bit of a change where it's still watercolor, but now it's a stripe, and it's not a regimented stripe. It's a bit more organic, a bit more like we'd cut this mask ourselves, and it's all done by scissors or hand. And I liked that imperfection, and it felt right for the style of the exhibit. However, I want to use this somewhere in the background, but it's a damaged piece of paper. I had it in my luggage and it got a bit smushed. So instead of being really upset about that, I just figured I'll use it as a reason to come up with something else. And when I looked at these photos, beyond the 2 shades of blue and that shot of yellow for contrast, what I really wanted was some red. There's this red detailing on the boat and the red in his shirt. So I had a look for different reds and found this lovely, gorgeous, old 2009 Cosmo Cricket Red Wood Grain. And I think I probably used 10 sheets of this back in the day, but now I'm going to use it again. So my plan right now is that I will cut this yellow down and have the red frame all the way in the background, and then I'm going to work with all these blues on top of that, so that even though I'm going to start with those 2, which makes you think blue is not coming in at all, there's going to be lots of blue on top of it. I often do layers like this where I have a big box and then these little 3 or 4 inch wide strips, and I do them all very orderly and make sure that all my corners are square. Today I'm going to take a little bit of a nod from the artist's style and take things a little less than straight on the edges. I want to just tilt things a little bit to just draw attention to that slight difference in the style. To make it a little obvious that I'm doing that on purpose. When you flip through the pages of my book, I'm hoping that then there'll be a connection between what you see in the photos and what the style is on the page. But I don't want it to be so far removed that it doesn't look like my work anymore. So I've just put this off center at just, 1 or 2 degrees. And instead of taking these strips and putting them straight like marching soldiers like this, I'm going to leave a little bit of space with the red at the top, so they're going to run off one edge and not the other, and they're going to be slightly angled. Now, I have these 2 photos, and likewise, you've seen me dozens and dozens of times make them really square and matted like this and cut one big mat to go around the edge. But I'm thinking that in this case, I might like the look a little better if I just overlap them a little bit like that. I still want to put a box behind them. In fact, maybe multiple boxes behind them. So I'm going to do some scientific measuring here. Figuring out how wide that box would need to be. And here's the scientific part. And then I just go trim that to a big rectangle based on those 2 little dents. So here's that box. I'm going to go ahead and just stick that down so that I think I will go ahead and go off the edge of the yellow there, because there's yellow in this pattern too. And then I want to bring that red from the background into the foreground a little bit. So I have my red 6x6, and I thought I might make it highlight one photo more than the other. Now, the photos are 6x4 and the paper is 6x6, so it's not going to make a traditional mat. It would be offset like this. Yeah, so I think I'll just take a little bit off the edge there. I'm using gray ink on all my edges today, by the way. I just thought that was a little bit of a nicer neutral than using a brown with these particular photos. Now I'm going to use the red to highlight this picture, and I want to stop for a moment just to say why, because I think that will come into play with my title when I get that far. So part of it is that I think this photo catches your eye naturally quicker anyway, because it's hilarious. He was desperate to get into this boat, and then once he could tip himself over this edge, he was almost tipping his head right into the bottom of the boat. He was fine, don't worry. But this moment really struck me when he was standing there a little bit more independent, and one of the books that this exhibit brought to life was a little story called Lost and Found. And this particular photo just to me says that sort of lost and found idea that this little boy is very small in this frame, and yet he's having a little moment of standing up. This was right when he was finding his confidence on his feet, so it was still a big mix of crawling and standing. And so it's a bit more of a symbolic photo. And I think he's so small in this picture that it's easy to lose the idea of what's there. Whereas this one is just always going to make me laugh no matter what. So I think the red around this particular photo is going to be more helpful in highlighting that picture that just needs that little bit more help. Okay, so I want these to have a little bit of movement to them. I don't want to cover up her head with that square angle like that. Maybe I move this one further down here. I'm not losing anything on the bottom of that boat if the red covers it a little bit. But I do want to make sure that you can see his feet are dangling in the air. I'll be honest, I've been looking at these two photos for a little bit longer than normal, and I'll tell you why so that you can see where my mind is going. All of the direction in this picture is going this way. And so every time I feel the need to put it over here, I then feel like all the movement in the page is going off the edge. Where I'd rather, since I made this column on the left, I'd rather everything kind of face into the right. But that's not happening. And maybe I should have started by having everything a little bit more right heavy. And I could even turn it upside down, but I don't think that I would like that frame now that I have this particular setup in my mind. So I kept thinking, well, it would be fine to overlap the top of this photo because the blurry legs in the background is not part of my story. So I wouldn't mind if I overlapped something like that. But then because this photo is so far over to the right, it really emphasizes how much this is over to the left. So instead of having this one at the top, if I bring this one to the bottom and this photo to the top, I get a little bit of a gap here, and I'm thinking now that I can make use of this by putting something important here so that that direction is pointing you towards something, be it the title, the journaling, or some embellishment. It's going to point to something that keeps your eye on the page rather than going out here into no man's land. And then this photo has all the direction that comes back this direction because he's facing this way, the lines are going this way, and so I need to have something equally important over here. And it's just a little bit more complicated when I look at the composition of the images than most sets of two photos that I happen to choose. Just in case you ever looked at a set of two photos and thought, why is this not going together easily? Well, there are factors. Okay, if I move this one down a little bit like this, I still have room for the mat. And yet I can still have this where my blue is above here, and you can still see that his feet are dangling out over the boat. I think if I pull it way out here, that's going to give me a little bit more space to work with. So although I normally just stick as I go, now that I've got these in the perfect position, I don't want them to move. So I'm just going to put my hand on top of everything so that I can pull stuff up and put the glue there without moving anything. It's a very graceful way to glue things, I'm sure. But sometimes you just gotta do what works. One more side here. Okay, photos are stuck. Now, I know that I wanted to use some watercolor in my journaling, and I thought I would show you something where I'm actually going to use a journaling card that went wrong. So I had some new watercolors the other day, and I was just trying out these different colors and seeing how saturated they were and things like that. And I liked the idea of seeing if I could have a light edge and a dark edge, but I found very quickly that the dark color really wanted to wick on the paper. So there's like this little bit that's light, and then everything else is pretty much the same. I couldn't get this any darker, and the dark had already soaked in up here. So you can imagine it just was the first time that I'd used that particular pigment, and it wasn't really the most beautiful look that I was after. But I was just trying it out on a little 3x4 piece of watercolor paper, and I wasn't worried. But then as I was clearing my desk, I noticed the other side. And I couldn't have done this on purpose, I don't think. But I love how this came out where it just seeped over, and because I was trying to do that where I had dark at one edge and light at the other, it did work when it seeped over to the other side. So I'm going to use this side, and the fact that that's a mistake is a secret between you and I. Okay, now where should this go? Should it go up here? Now I have lots of options of where I can put this watercolor card. I know that I need something here because of those lines, so I could try tucking it in behind here. And that's one option, but it does mean that I lose almost all of this pattern that brings my color scheme together, and it does feel very blocky there. I also like this option of bringing it up here, but then it does make me wish that I had a little bit left of it that I could put down here to go all the way off the bottom of the page, so it looked like there were 3 columns there. But that could also work. And then I have this idea of putting the journaling over here. Now, I don't like doing something like this, where I end up with this little section of this pattern, and I don't like it all the way out here, where I end up with an even bigger amount of space and this feels like it's floating. But one of the lovely things about layers is that I can always find somewhere that will make it feel like it goes. So I could tuck it underneath there and get it in just the right position that you can see the watercolor, but it looks like it's all tucked underneath there. And I really like this as far as the lines on the page are going and where your eye is directed. But there's one thing I don't like, and that's that then I end up with all of this white card on this white paper, and this feels very heavy compared to this. So all I'm going to do to remedy that is add a little bit more blue that's going to come all the way to the right hand side. And I had a 6x6 from the Starshine 6x6 pad. It's just a blue crosshatch, and I've cut it into 2 pieces, just 3x6 each, so that I can use it on both sides of my layout. And I'm just looking at where my options are for running it across the page. And I think I like the idea of making it look like it's a 3x12 strip that goes all the way across, but I think I should do the same sort of thing that I did with that one. So I'll really only need the 1/2 because so much of it is covered up. And I'll have this side go all the way off the edge like these, and I'll have this one have that little bit of red frame still showing. Oh, and I'll add my gray ink to make it coordinate with everything else. Place it just at a really small angle. That's probably even too much of an angle. So that when you really look at that corner, you'll see that it's not perfectly straight, but it's not going to scream that it's overly angled and make your head go crooked when you're looking. That's what I'm always trying to avoid. Don't make your head go crooked. And I'll just grab my ruler so that I can fake this being all the way across. So if that were a 12x12 or a 3x12 even, that's where it would be. Is my adhesive in the right place? I think it's not too bad. Okay. Then this card is going to go right along there. The journaling is going to go here, and I think some of my embellishment needs to carry from the photo all the way across here, so that that visual line from his eyes carries all the way across the horizontal on the page. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, then I have space up here that's going to work for my title and my embellishment. So it's time to figure out what those 2 things are going to be. I've decided that I'll embellish in this space, and then maybe something small over here, and in a little grouping that's going to go across from the photo to here. And that's going to leave this space for my title. That's going to work with the lines here, but it does mean that I need to fit my title in this space, and whatever letters I choose need to be some that are going to be legible on top of that pattern, because that's the busiest pattern I have on the page, and that's where I've chosen to put my letters. So I just need to be aware as I do that. But I wanted to talk to you about how I'm choosing the title and not just put it on the page. So I have a few different titles in mind as I've worked on the page so far, and I've been thinking in my head about these photos and that day and the story that I want to tell. So let me backtrack a little bit, and I'm going to do a little more talking today than just scrapbooking. So these photos were taken at a place called the Discover Children's Story Center, which is a beautiful children's museum that's entirely based on the idea of reading stories, and different rooms are different storybooks brought to life. There are storytellers and performers throughout the museum that really take the characters and bring them to life in a way that doesn't feel like a children's museum. It feels more like you're in a professional theater or something. The storytelling is amazing, and it's a wonderful, wonderful museum. So I know that this is a place that this was the first time we've gone, but I know that this is somewhere that we will visit often, and we've already been back several times, and we will continue to go back. The stories change, the museum is always changing, and that is something that I think I would really like in my album because this is the first time we've been there. So I want to document that part of the story. And there are a few different ways that I thought I could do this. I could go with a really factual title and just use the name of the museum. It's certainly something that works, and I've done pages where I use the name of a location as my title. So I could just call it the Discover Story Center or the Discover Children's Museum. But I don't think that really matches with what I'm going to tell. And I don't think it's the best match to these photos, because I think if I were using a photo of the front door or the front of the museum, then that would be a great way to introduce it. I also think if I was creating a layout where I had maybe 24 little photos that were all different shots of the museum from start to finish, that would be a great way to bring it all together, just the name of the museum. But I don't think it fits these photos perfectly. So then I'm going to go to something that's maybe a little bit more more esoteric, I guess. So I could use the idea of lost and found, because that was something that really came to me with this particular photo, that this part of the museum was about the book Lost and Found, and that I even though I don't feel like he's lost in the museum, there is that kind of, I like the two words. I can see that he's kind of lost in this big open space, and that he's found his feet, his confidence. So I like that idea too. But I thought that makes sense when I break it down, and it's a little bit too far removed for it to make sense when you just turn the page of the album. If it said Lost and Found and you didn't know that book, you would think, did I lose my child at this museum and I'm documenting the fact that he got lost and I found him or something? It just, to me, is one step too far, so it doesn't completely make sense. But I liked the link. So I then thought of another phrase. Now, I have this on a bookmark. I have a bookmark that says, "Get lost in books." And it has a little picture of a girl who has so many books stacked up on top of her in her reading list that she's kind of surrounded and can't see the outside world. And that, to me, that is the nice mix. So I can have that little idea that I know is part of the Lost and Found room in this exhibit, but it's okay if only I know that the word lost is a link there. I can really link it to the way I want to tell the story, that I hope this museum will continue to inspire him for years and get him to read all sorts of different things, and that I hope he grows up to love reading books. And so that idea that he could spend his whole childhood getting lost in books, this is something that I've really struck on, that helps me tell the story. So that's the title I'm going to use, and it actually came from my bookmark. So there are definitely titles that are out there in all different ways, but I just wanted to share with you today the steps I took to get from option 1 to option 2 to option 3, and then my rule, just like when I go through my stash and I find a blue paper that will work, I stop looking and I don't go through another 50 shades of blue paper just so that I can find one that might be a little bit better than the one that I already know will work. I do the same thing with titles. So now that I'm happy with the third one that I've come to, I'm going to stop this process. I'm not going to go on to 10 more titles that may or may not be better. That's my title. Okay, I'm going to use thickers and glitter. I've pulled out gold thickers in Fitzgerald and some turquoise thickers in Lullaby. Those are much older. And for the smaller words, some turquoise flat stickers, old sassafras letters. So title's going to go here. One option, if I can't make it legible on top of this pattern, is that I could always put some vellum behind it to soften the pattern, but I'm going to try it right on top. I opened this pack of thickers that I was so decided I had my heart set on using, and I don't have any S's, and both Lost and Books require an S. So I'm going to fake it by using a Z and taking off the top so that it's going to be a really freehand type S, but I think it'll be legible once everything else is there. Journaling in place, and I've left a little space for embellishment, which I may come to regret, but I think I can make it work. I'm going to start with these clouds, and I think they will look nice and up here at the top. I'm just checking to see which, because they're a mix of white and cream, and I have this white pattern behind, but I think the collage look how they have different text and ledgers on top, I think it will work so that it makes sense to mix the white and the cream. I find that white and cream, if you're doing things really, really orderly in a more graphic, line-driven style, then white and cream can look a little bit off. But when you're working more with things a little angled, things a little more organic, and certainly in a very collage style, which this is not, then white and cream can look beautiful together. So just like to check to make sure I'm not imagining things in my head before I start to adhere them. Now, what I am thinking right now is that I have this one that's cream and this one that's cream, and that makes this one that's white and plain look a little out of place to me if I don't have another one somewhere. So I think I'm only going to use 3. So there's one more that's cream and it's patterned. So I'm going to go with that one. And I'm going to go ahead and get sticking with these. I'm just going to add a little gray to the edges, really, really subtle. And I'm going to place these so that they're bringing different layers together. So they're going off the edges, but they're also overlapped there where this paper meets that paper. This one's going to go up a little higher, and I'm going to act as if this stripe is a paper that I'm connecting. And this one's going to go off the edge, which means I need to be careful when I cut it apart because chipboard's a little more difficult. Okay. This chipboard set also has raindrops, but I don't think I'm going to use them. I think I'm just going to leave the clouds. Okay, but I thought instead of raindrops, I would use some stars. And maybe I use the yellow stars. These are little Studio Calico ones that I've just kind of been ticking away at for a while with the different colors. I want to start to bring this together. I'm not going to stick this one down because I think I need to put something here. But, oh, actually that's my last yellow one. So maybe I will put it over here with the cloud. Okay, that's that decision made. I thought I had one more little small one left, but I don't. Not in that color. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. And I need to look for some embellishment that could be a horizontal strip. So it could be washi, it could be a rub-on, it could be a border sticker, anything that I can use that will connect these on a little horizontal path. For that horizontal element, I'm going to use some stamps. I'm going to use 2 stamps from this set that is from an old Studio Calico kit. I'm going to use this text that says, "Love you more than all the stars," and I'm going to use this little line border. The text is going to go first, and I'm going to do the text in blue, but I'm doing quite a light blue so that it will still be obvious that you read the journaling all the way to the bottom. And that's really subtle. And you have to kind of look at it. That's kind of what I wanted to go for, that it wouldn't overtake the handwritten journaling. And then these little stripes. Now, if I put it down here, you can see the stripes are actually a little bit too wide for the gap that I have there. Does that make sense? And obviously I'm going to have to do them more than once to fill that whole space. So I'm going to start on this side, and I'm not going to ink the entire stamp. I'm going to let it just kind of naturally, I'm going to use the edge of the ink pad on this side and let it kind of naturally go to the edge of the ink pad. I hope that makes sense. I'm having trouble finding words that will make that make sense. Okay, so here's my stamp, here's my ink, and I'm using just the edge and tapping. And it's not precise, but I don't have ink that goes all the way up to the top. That's what I'm going for. And then place that there. And because I'm stamping it on watercolor paper, this is also going to make it even less precise, which is fine by me. And then here I want to mask off this bit so that I don't accidentally stamp onto there. So I just take a scrap of paper to cover that. Done. Just that little bit of color and text and pattern all in there, just really, really small. Okay. Now to bring a little bit more red up here somewhere, and maybe a little bit more of the gray as a neutral around the page, and then I think that's pretty much it. To bring the red back up to the top, I just decided I'd go ahead and carry on with that same stamp, and I've used it to add the date. So I did the date in that same blue ink that I used for the quotation down here. And I think gray around the edges here. And then I need to find a little spot that it will work up here at the top. Maybe it needs to sit behind something. I think that's too much. It breaks up this sky a little bit too much. So I could bring it right up to the top, but it's not really going to fit. What if I use it? Actually, okay. I like it along this top edge here. I'll run the date so it's right up at the top. And then I think just to have a little bit of a different detail, I'll staple this in between the date and the red, and then I'll bring my stapler back down here where it's just going to be for show, and I'll add a couple little staples here to make it coordinate. Maybe just one staple actually. Yeah. What I'm going to do is bring in these letter stickers that I just barely used and run them on the vertical. So although I'm not using the title of the name of the museum as my page title, I'm going to use that word discover. And I'm just going to run it right along this edge. And my journaling starts with the name. So as long as everything, as long as you're stopping to read one bit of the lettering, then you're reading all of it, it all fits together and makes the story make sense. And I figure if you're only reading one bit and it doesn't make sense and you're not bothering to read the rest, that's okay. You just aren't the type that will worry about whether all the words tell a cohesive story. And that's okay, by the way. I write on all of my pages, and I write a lot sometimes and not a lot other times, but I always write something. And the writing is very much for me. It's what makes scrapbooking my therapy. It is what makes the page process really valuable to me personally, but I understand that not everyone feels that way, and that not everyone wants to read what I write as well. And that's okay. It doesn't matter. I kind of feel like in this sort of format, it's much it's much more supportive to my own mentality, that if I'm writing here and it's just for me, that is a million times nicer to me than if I write a book and no one reads it. If I write a book, if I decided one day I would wake up and go, I'm going to have a book and I'm going to get it published, and then I never get it published, that would probably crush me. But I don't mind if no one ever reads my journaling here except me. So it's about finding what works for your personality. And there you go. While I was spelling discover, now you get to know a little bit more about that. Okay, last embellishment I'm going to use are these little gray enamel stars. And I want to put one right up here next to those stripes so that that's pulled together a little bit. I think, am I going to regret that? Oh, okay. Thought I might want one on the photo, but actually changed my mind. Normally I would put this right off the edge here, but I think against that, the yellow, it's a little hard to tell the shape, where if I put it on the blue, and the higher contrast of the blue and the red against that gray makes it easier to see. And then one up here for balance, I think. There we go. This is a little bit different than my normal embellishing style. It has all this open space here. But it's very much inspired by the style of the books, and that makes me happy. That's my whole finished page. Like I said, I will spend a little bit more time in the next few episodes talking about titles, so if this is something that you want to continue to work on in your own albums, by all means keep watching the next few adventures. But thank you very, very much for joining me. I would love to see what you make this week, or to see the pages that have titles that you really love. I'd love to hear about your process for finding titles and things like that. And I'd love to chat with you about anything scrapbooking really on our Facebook chat group, which is called Scrapbook Like a Superhero. You can find a link below, or you can look us up. We're pretty easy to find. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and thumbs up if you like, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.